I was standing in my own garden during my retirement party when I saw it, my daughter-in-law's hand sprinkling something into my wine glass. She smiled sweetly, as if nothing had happened. My chest tightened, not from the drink, but from the thought that my own son sat beside her, blind to the danger. The betrayal cut deep. But years of patience had taught me something. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. So, when she pressed that glass into my hand, I already had a plan. I lifted the toast, and with one small, careful move, I changed everything. What happened next turned the night upside down, and it was only the beginning. Stay with me through this story. And before we go on, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? The pen felt heavier than usual in my hand, as though it carried not just ink, but the weight of decades. I pressed it to the paper, finishing the last stroke of my name on the retirement contract. The ink was still wet, glistening under the desk lamp in my Charleston study. That shine looked final, permanent, the way a tombstone looks on the day it's placed. Pride tugged at me, years of building the company, the long nights, the sacrifices, but it was laced with a loneliness I couldn't quite shake. My late wife should have been here to see this moment. Instead, silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning fighting against the humid southern twilight. Leaning back, I let the pen rest on the mahogany desk. The smell of old books from the shelves reminded me of evenings spent reading aloud to my son when he was a boy. Now, as I looked at the contract, I wondered whether closing this chapter would open another, one I wasn't ready for. The door clicked open before I could collect my thoughts. Damien and Marla stepped in without knocking. My son's smile was quick, too quick, and Marla's heels echoed sharply against the hardwood floor. They congratulated me. "Dad, that's amazing," Damien said, his voice a little too eager. But their eyes weren't on me. They kept drifting toward the contract. The payout figure was printed in bold, a sum that could make or break lives. I forced a polite smile, noting the way Marla's hand rested on Damien's arm, guiding him like a puppet on strings. Her voice was smooth, almost affectionate, but it carried an edge I knew well. "Such a relief. Isn't it, Luther? Finally time to relax. You've earned it." Yet her gaze lingered on the pages as if the ink belonged to her. A quiet unease coiled in my chest. Their warmth felt rehearsed, like actors in a play. The contract still smelled of fresh ink, a reminder that this was mine, my work, my years, my life. And yet, in their smiles, I saw calculation. The words came sooner than I expected. Damien cleared his throat, glancing at Marla before speaking. "Dad, there's something we wanted to ask. 5 million, just a portion. We've got an idea, a new future to build." The bluntness hit harder than the number itself. 5 million. Not a hug. Not a thank you. Not even a moment to share in what this day meant. Just a demand. Marla squeezed his hand, eyes fixed on me like a hawk's. "It's not much for you, Luther. It would help us so much." The ache in my chest grew sharp. After all the years of giving, of holding this family together, this was what they saw in me now, a bank account to be tapped. Their words hurt less than their tone. That sense of entitlement. I swallowed, steadying myself. "I can't do that, Damien." My voice was gentle but firm. It was the voice I once used to explain hard truths when he was a boy. Only now he was a man, and it cut him differently. Marla leaned forward, her smile shifting to something softer, almost condescending. "Oh, Luther, you should think about it. At your age, wouldn't it be easier to let go of all this responsibility? Isn't life meant to be comfortable now?" The ink on the contract gleamed in the lamplight, reminding me that boundaries had to exist. My life's work wasn't theirs to erase with a single request. I felt my hands clench, then loosen again. Damien's voice grew harder. "We're not asking for the world. Just help us get started. You've got more than enough." The pressure in the room thickened. Marla's eyes narrowed, her tone sliding from sweet to sharp. Sometimes, holding on too tight just shows fear. Silence became my shield. Words would only feed the fire, and I refused to give her that satisfaction. The years had taught me that silence, wielded carefully, could be stronger than any argument. My heart pounded, but my face remained calm. Her smile changed then, a flicker of something darker beneath the surface, cold, deliberate calculation that unsettled me in a way I hadn't felt before. I stood, gathering the contract. "I think we're finished here," I said quietly, leaving the office. I could still feel the ink drying on my signature, and the chill of Marla's smile following me home. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, but it did little to ease the tightness that lingered in my chest. The memory of Marla's smile from the night before, so calm, so calculated, had followed me into my sleep and stirred restless dreams. I pushed myself out of bed, deciding that today would be about something lighter, something I could control. The retirement party was hours away, and I told myself that preparations would be my focus. I walked slowly through the house, noting the scent of freshly polished wood and the faint aroma of coffee Clara had brewed. Out back, the garden stretched wide, framed by centuries-old oak trees draped in Spanish moss, their branches swaying slightly in the humid breeze. I paused at the sight of the tables already set, white linen cloths smoothed perfectly, glasses catching the light like tiny prisms. Food deliveries would arrive soon, and I wanted everything to carry a sense of dignity. This house, this garden, they weren't just mine. They were the result of decades of work, a life my late wife and I had built together. Even as I checked over the flower arrangements, roses and hydrangeas that Ruth Calder had kindly helped me choose, I couldn't quiet the question whispering inside. Would Damien ever look at this home as more than a vault of money? Would he ever understand what it meant to build something from nothing, to pour sweat and faith into every brick? I felt the sting of doubt creep in. By mid-morning, the air grew heavier, and I retreated indoors when the phone rang. Wallace's voice came through, low and deliberate. "Luther, I hate to call with something like this today, but you need to hear it." His words carried a gravity that pulled me down into my chair before I even knew what he was about to say. He spoke of whispers around Charleston, rumors that Marla had been running up debts large enough to reach the ears of men who didn't take losses lightly. I sat quietly, gripping the receiver, every syllable weighing more than the last. It wasn't the money that unsettled me. Money could vanish and be made again. It was the thought that Marla would gamble not only with her own life, but with Damien's, with mine, with anyone who crossed her path. Wallace's voice grew softer. "Be careful, Luther. This isn't the kind of debt that gets forgiven with time." When the call ended, I stayed in my chair for a long moment. My mind replayed Marla's demand from the night before, her insistence on $5 million as if it were nothing more than loose change. Now the desperation behind her words was clear. It wasn't a dream of new beginnings, but a frantic attempt to cover tracks already burning. The ache in my chest deepened. Betrayal was no longer just an abstract wound. It was sharper, heavier, almost predatory. I thought of my wife again, how she would have seen through Marla long before I had. Maybe I had chosen blindness for too long, convincing myself that keeping peace in the family was worth the silence. I finally whispered into the quiet room, "Thank you for the warning, Wallace." Though the line had long gone dead, my gaze drifted toward the window. And that's when I saw it. Marla's car pulling up earlier than expected. The sun caught the shine of its hood, and for a brief second, I could almost see her reflection smiling back at me. She stepped out with that same practiced grace, her lips curved in a polite smile that never reached her eyes. My stomach tightened. This party I had planned as a celebration of years of hard work was about to become something else entirely. As I stood watching her approach, a chill swept through me. This wasn't just about dinner, speeches, and laughter under the oak trees. For her, it was something more, an opportunity to play whatever game she had been preparing all along. I realized then that the party might not mark the close of my career, but the beginning of a war I had never asked for. That first doubt from years back rose like a bruise under the skin as late afternoon bled into the oaks. The garden crew finished stringing cafe lights along the rail of the back porch, and a soft clink of crystal drifted from the folding tables. Charleston humidity pressed on everything, the linens, the roses, the breath in my chest. Preparations helped keep hands busy. The mind, not so much. Platters were counted, chairs leveled on the flagstones, catering confirmed. A place card with my name, just Luther, plain and clean, sat at the head table where Ruth said I should sit tomorrow. A man can hide his worry inside small tasks. There are plenty of corners in a house to tuck it away. The bell rang. Damien stood there with that quick, apologetic grin he learned as a boy when caught with a hand in the cookie jar. Marla was half a step behind him, a ribboned bottle cradled in her arms, the label hidden under gold paper. "A peace offering," she said lightly, almost musical, as if last night had been a misunderstanding born of fatigue and not the edge of a cliff. She stepped inside without needing an invite. Her perfume, a citrus cut with something sharper, took the hallway like it owned it. "We came to celebrate your big moment," Damien said, palms out. "We were out of line last night." "We're proud of you, Dad." The words landed, but the tone slid. Marla's eyes moved faster than her smile. Quick sips at the crown molding, the framed service awards, the antique walnut sideboard my wife and I hauled home from Savannah back when money stretched only if we held our breath. Those eyes measured, totaled, filed away, a ledger blinking behind lashes. "Set it in the kitchen," I said, guiding them back. "Clara's been keeping us honest with the schedule." Clara, sleeves rolled, was polishing the last of the crystal. She nodded to them with that serene calm she keeps for storm days. The bottle went onto the counter, gold ribbon flashing where the sun slanted in. A pretty thing in a pretty room. "We want to make tomorrow special," Marla said, palms pressing together as if in prayer. "New beginnings, right? You deserve it, and smoother sailing for everyone." Damien chuckled at that, too loud, too quick. No hard feelings. The house answered them with its own memory, footsteps from long decades, Sunday dinners, my wife's laugh floating down the hall. A man learns to listen to rooms. This one remembered who had carried it through the years. "We all say things we regret when we're tired," I said. "Tomorrow is about gratitude. You two will help greet the guests." "Of course," Marla said, that smile brightening by degree. Then her gaze snagged on the study door left half ajar, where the edges of folders lay squared with lawyerly precision. Her face didn't change. Her eyes did. Just the briefest flicker, as if a hand slipped under a tablecloth and pinched. They didn't stay long, just long enough for compliments that felt practiced and a cheery promise to arrive early for last-minute help. At the door, Damien hugged me, his chin pressed hard to my shoulder like he might be bracing himself for a wave. Marla kissed the air and whispered, "You'll be so relaxed after all this. Age should be gentle, Luther." When the door closed, the quiet carried a higher pitch. Out back, Clara kept at the glasses. "She's efficient," Clara said finally, not looking up. "At everything she does," came the answer, mild as milk. Later, when the truck from the rental place rumbled away and the garden settled, Clara came in with a bundle of linen napkins on her hip. She paused near the sink, glanced toward the open back door, then toward the empty hallway where the couple had stood. Her voice lowered without being asked. "Mr. Branson, I don't want to be in the middle of family matters." Fingers smoothed the top napkin until it lay perfectly square. But I heard something. The kitchen clock ticked in that particular way kitchen clocks do when they've seen too much. "They were by the camellias," she went on, "before they left for their car, Mrs." Quinlan was on the phone. She thought the hedge would muffle her, I guess. Clara swallowed. She said, "It all has to be cleared by Sunday night. I'll have access by then. Don't you understand? It's covered." Then she said, "No delays. I'll put it in his glass myself if that's what it takes to get him calm tomorrow. He's stubborn." The word cut down the middle of the room. Calm. A harmless word until it isn't. The bottle on the counter seemed to glow in the late light, harmless and dressed for company. Something inside the chest tightened in a way the old doctor would call age, and the pastor might call discernment. "Thank you," I said. "Truth has a habit of entering through the back door." Clara's eyes shone with a guilty kind of relief, as if she'd been carrying a fragile box, and finally set it down without breaking it. I didn't want to bring trouble in here. Trouble shows itself. You just drew the curtain. She nodded and returned to her work. Shoulders lower now, hands steady. At the counter, the ribbon felt cheaper than it looked. Sometimes gold is just plastic with shine. I did not reach for the bottle. It stayed there, a pretty object standing between two versions of tomorrow. The mind began to line up facts like chess pieces. Wallace's call that morning. Hushed rumors about debts that chase a person into bad choices. The demand last night for a number spoken without a blink. The measuring eyes. The slip at the study door. The word calm wrapped around something else. Money can warp a person's compass. Desperation snaps it clean. From the garden, the wind lifted the cafe lights into the tenderest sway. Progress moves slowly. One stake, one wire, one bulb at a time. Undoing can be faster. A man in my years learns patience in fixing things and speed when fire catches. Damien's face floated up next, his boy face beneath the beard, the one that used to crease with grease when he helped in the shop, the one that lit up when his mother brought out a pie to cool. Love doesn't change its shape, it changes its grip. Tonight it held in an open hand. I left the bottle where it stood and walked to the study. The contract sat square, signature dark now, no longer wet, but not yet old. Beneath it, the folder Wallace prepared for the trust and the power of attorney I'd never needed to use. People think age equals softness. It often equals readiness. A chair creaked, my own private choir. The house breathed around me, wood settling, pipes whispering, the careful calm of things that last. From here the hedge came into view, glossy leaves reflecting a slice of sky. Somewhere beyond them, wheels rolled on gravel. Somewhere beyond that, a woman with debts had a plan and a timeline. Clara tapped once at the frame. "Anything you want me to do different tomorrow?" she asked. "No," I said. "We keep the list we made. We follow it by the numbers. No changes." Her chin lifted a fraction. "Yes, sir. And, Clara," I added, "thank you for bringing me the whisper and not letting it grow into a shout." When she left, the quiet returned with a clean edge. The contract's pages shifted under the desk fan, a soft rustle like dry leaves. Boundaries matter. Ink makes them visible, but resolve keeps them standing when wind leans hard. Dusk poured itself into the room. In that thinning light, the gift bottle on the counter was still a promise wrapped in shine. It would stay unopened until I decided who it belonged to, and under what terms. Tomorrow would be about gratitude, as promised. It might also be about proof. There's a way a mask looks when it begins to loosen, not falling yet, but no longer fitted to the face that wears it. That look had crossed Marla's features before she realized the study door was open. Small things tell on us. Eyes first, then hands, then the voice that chooses the wrong word and can't pull it back. The garden lights blinked to life. One row, then the next, all the way to the back gate. Their reflection lay along the kitchen window like a string of steady stars. A man could sit at the table and think of endings, or of beginnings, or of the thin line between them. He could also stand, go turn the bolt on the back door, and trust that tomorrow he would need to be both hospitable and alert. As evening shadows stretched across the grass, the truth settled with the same slow certainty as dew. The mask she wore was already cracking, and soon, one way or another, the whole family would see what lay beneath. The garden shimmered with lantern light as the evening settled over Charleston. Old colleagues shook my hand, neighbors patted my shoulder, and the sound of clinking glasses mixed with cicadas in the heavy southern air. It was meant to be a night of closure, a clean ending to a long life of work. Yet, beneath the laughter and polite chatter, something sour stirred. Damien and Marla moved through the crowd like polished actors. Their smiles stretched a little too tight, their laughter just a beat too sharp. Watching them was like watching a play I no longer believed in. I drifted toward the drinks table, making the rounds, exchanging nods. Crystal glasses stood in neat rows, catching the glow of lanterns. Marla was already there, swirling bottles of wine, her charm flowing easily as she spoke to guests. I slowed my step, eyes fixed not on her face but on her hands. With the slightest flick, her fingers moved over a glass. A fine powder, pale and almost invisible, slipped into the wine. At 74, my vision sometimes faltered at dusk, but not enough to miss betrayal served in crystal. A cold wave ran down my spine, though I forced my features calm. My hand found the edge of the table to steady itself, though I made it look casual. The crowd saw nothing, only I had caught the truth hidden in her little performance. I didn't confront her. Silence has its uses, especially for an old man people assume is slow. I let her complete her act. She picked up the glass, turned with that flawless smile, and glided toward me. "To you, Luther," she said sweetly, pressing the glass into my hand. "May you enjoy what you've built." The stem of the glass rested cold against my palm. My pulse hammered, but my grip stayed steady. Around us, the chatter never wavered. Guests saw a loving daughter-in-law honoring her father-in-law. I saw a predator dressed in pearls. I excused myself a few minutes later under the pretense of checking in on the kitchen staff. The air inside was cooler, a brief refuge from the heavy garden. I walked past trays of food and into the small service area. There, buried under napkins and lemon rinds in the trash, something silver caught my eye. I leaned closer. A crumpled foil packet, faintly bitter-smelling, glinted under the kitchen light. I didn't need to lift it long to know what it was. Proof, sharp and undeniable. I slipped it back under the waist, covering it as though nothing had disturbed me. My chest tightened, but not from fear, from clarity. The moment confirmed what my eyes had already told me. Marla had crossed a line no family member should ever dare. I walked back into the garden, the tainted glass still in hand, faces turned toward me, waiting. Damien clapped loudly, drawing attention. "A toast," he called. The guests hushed, glasses lifted in expectation. I raised mine as well, high enough for the lanterns to catch the wine's deep red. Inside, my thoughts were not of celebration, but of survival. The hardest part of old age is not the aches in the bones or the dimming of sight. It's watching your own blood walk you toward the grave with a smile. Their eyes were on me, every last one, Marla's especially. Bright with anticipation, she thought the play was hers to control. But I had lived long enough to learn, if this was their game, I would play it better. The garden lights shimmered against the deepening Charleston night, the lanterns swinging softly in the breeze as if they carried secrets of their own. Every face turned toward me, their glasses raised, their voices hushed in expectation. My hand trembled only slightly as I lifted my own glass higher, the weight of it heavier than any I'd ever held. For a moment, it felt like all of life's burdens, my years of labor, the loss of my wife, the quiet sacrifices no one ever noticed, were distilled into that single stem of crystal. With a careful pause, I shifted the glass on the table, letting it rest beside another nearly identical one. The gesture was subtle, nothing more than the hesitation of an old man steadying his grip. But inside, the tension snapped tight. Patience had been my companion for decades, through storms and betrayals alike, and patience now gave me the precision I needed. Voices erupted in cheer, and I began my toast. "To family," I said, my voice steady though my chest felt like a drum. "To the years behind us, and the work that endures beyond our hands. To resilience, and to love that refuses to vanish, no matter how tested." The words rang true. They had been my life's creed. Guests clapped. Some shouted their approval. Glasses clinked in response. Amid the applause, I slid the glass, hers, not mine, closer to Marla. She stood smiling, radiant in a way only ambition can make a person glow. She reached for the drink without hesitation, the same glass she thought I had lifted moments earlier. She was distracted by the rush of congratulations, by the eyes upon her. She did not see the quiet shift, the sleight of hand performed by an old man who refused to be underestimated. Her lips touched the rim with certainty, not a flicker of doubt in her face. I watched, my own glass still poised, untouched. She sipped, swallowed, and smiled wider, as if savoring not only the wine but her own victory. Inside, a cold dread spread through me. That rim had been meant for me. That swallow had been intended to mark my end. Yet here she was, choosing her own fate. I felt no triumph. The sight burned deeper than satisfaction could reach. What pierced me was the thought that my son, Damien, had let her walk him this far down a dark path, and he didn't even know it. Damien laughed and clinked his glass against mine, his face flushed with wine and the pride of celebration. He didn't notice the tremor that ran through her hand. He didn't notice how her smile flickered like a candle in the breeze. But I did. Every second stretched, every beat of silence longer than the last. I said nothing. I would not call attention to her, not yet. The foil packet I'd found earlier still haunted me. That bitter scent clung to memory, making her laughter tonight ring hollow. She tried too hard, laughed too loudly, as if to mask a tightening she could not control. To the crowd, it was merriment. To me, it was the echo of deceit unraveling. I kept my composure, sipping from the untouched wine as if nothing in the world weighed on me. But inside, a storm brewed. Was this protection, or was I now the executor of her punishment? Had I just survived, or had I delivered a sentence I could not take back? The music swelled, someone called for a song, and the garden filled with voices. Chairs scraped on the grass, silverware clinked on plates, laughter carried on the warm night air. It was all so ordinary, so normal, that the subtle change in her demeanor nearly vanished in the noise. But my eyes never left her. Marla's hand, graceful and manicured, began to shake. She tried to set the glass down lightly, but it toppled, spilling red across the white tablecloth. Gasps rose from a few nearby, quickly covered by laughter at her clumsiness. Yet I saw it for what it was. The stain spread across the cloth, dark and jagged, like a wound opening in plain sight. The last thread of doubt unraveled in that instant. Wallace's warning, Clara's whispered truth, my own weary instincts, all converged under the glow of the lanterns. The poison had found its mark, and the night was no longer just a celebration. It had become the turning of the tide. The first light crept across Charleston, and with it came the hum of voices drifting down the street. Folks here never let a whisper rest long. By dawn, it was already rumor. I could hear it when I stepped out onto the porch, neighbors exchanging glances, heads tilted closer together. "Did you hear about Marla last night?" one woman murmured as she passed by with her dog. "Collapsed right there at the Branson party. Some say it was the wine." Her words floated up like smoke, thick with suggestion. In the South, gossip ran quicker than the tides and hit harder than truth. Inside, the silence of my kitchen was sharp. On the counter sat the empty crystal glass I hadn't touched. The faintest ring of wine clung to the rim, dried overnight into a pale stain. I looked at it, wondering how close I had come to leaving this world without a word of warning. The phone rang, jolting the stillness. Damien's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. "Dad," his voice was clipped, strained. "Marla's not feeling well. She's resting." The pause between his words told more than he intended. He was holding something back. "Resting?" I asked softly, keeping my tone steady. "She fainted, that's all. The doctors aren't worried." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, don't get caught up in what people are saying. It's just bad luck." I looked again at the glass on the counter, its weight heavier now in memory than it had been in hand. "Take care of her," I replied simply. "That's what matters." But as the line clicked dead, unease lingered. Damien's voice held more fear for reputation than for his wife's health. By noon, I was seated across from Wallace Darden in his downtown office, oak bookshelves towering behind him, the air thick with the scent of old leather and ink. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes sharp as ever. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about Marla's hand hovering over my wine glass, the fine powder dissolving like snowflakes on water. I described the silver packet I'd found glinting in the kitchen trash. Wallace listened, face impassive, his pen unmoving on the legal pad before him. When I finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "Luther," Memory can damn or defend, but in court, memory alone is smoke. We need proof, not just suspicion. I know, I said quietly, but I can't ignore what I saw. His eyes softened just slightly. Proof means risk. You understand that. If we start building a case, we expose you and your family. Are you ready for that? Leaning back in the chair, I let the question hang. The years weighed heavy in my chest, decades of building a business, raising a son, sacrificing for a family I thought would honor the name, and now I was left guarding my own life against the very people I once believed I lived for. Better to face shame alive than to be buried quietly by their schemes. The choice was bitter but clear. I'm ready, I said. Do what you need to do. Wallace nodded, scribbling a note before opening a drawer. Then we start with documentation. Everything you saw, everything you suspect, we preserve it. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. These are protective measures. Keep them close. If anything happens, these papers speak for you. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but it carried the weight of judgment. My fingers closed around it, and the air in the office thickened with the gravity of what had just passed between us. Wallace leaned closer. You need to prepare yourself for one more thing. Luther. If this comes into the light, Damien will have to choose sides, and you might not like where he stands. The words struck deeper than I expected. I had braced for Marla's betrayal, but to hear my own son's loyalty questioned, that was another wound entirely. I stood slowly, the envelope pressed to my chest. If Damien stands with her, then I'll know the truth I've avoided for too long. As I stepped out of Wallace's office, the sun hit my face, bright and unforgiving. The city bustled around me, unaware of the storm closing in on one old man's family. I tucked the envelope inside my coat, its presence heavier than any betrayal I had carried before. Each step toward home echoed with the knowledge that nothing would be the same again. Damien was already waiting on the porch when I returned, his arms folded across his chest and his jaw tight. The morning light caught the hard line of his face, and for a moment I saw the boy who once trailed after me in the garden, begging to help rake leaves. But the look he gave me now was not of a son toward his father. It was the glare of a man convinced he had been wronged. You had no right, he said, his voice low but shaking. Marla fainted, and you turned it into gossip. People are saying you set her up, that you embarrassed her on purpose. The sting of his accusation went deeper than any wound. To hear my own flesh and blood defend her with such fire, while speaking to me as if I were a stranger, it left a hollow ache in my chest. I steadied myself, drawing a slow breath. Damien, I began, keeping my tone calm. I saw her hand. She slipped powder into my glass. The foil was in the trash. Do you think I'd invent something like this? His eyes darted away, a flicker of doubt there for only a second before he forced it down. You imagined it, he said. You're tired. You're 74. Dad, maybe your memory isn't as sharp as you think. Those words, spoken so flatly, carried more cruelty than he realized. It wasn't just doubt. It was dismissal, a son telling his father he could no longer be trusted with the truth. My chest tightened, but I refused to let him see me falter. By evening, I found myself at the Quinlan home, drawn into a gathering meant to smooth tensions but destined to ignite them. Their living room smelled faintly of roses and old wood polish, an elegant southern space with white drapes and family portraits watching from the walls. Harold Quinlan sat in his armchair, his brow heavy with concern, while Elaine fussed with a tray of teacups. Marla entered slowly, dressed in pale silk, her face pale but her eyes sharp. She took Damien's hand, leaning into him with the practiced grace of a woman who knew how to wield sympathy. Luther, she said, her voice quivering, I don't know what you think you saw, but I would never harm you. You're like a father to me. Tears slid down her cheek with perfect timing. I love Damien too much to ever hurt his family. Her words landed like stones, each one designed not to prove innocence, but to sow doubt about my sanity. Around the room, heads tilted, whispers passed. I caught Elaine's worried glance. the way she bit her lip. Harold's frown deepened, though he remained silent. I spoke evenly, my eyes fixed on Marla. I know what I saw, powder in my glass, the packet in the trash. You can smile and cry all you want, but truth doesn't wash off with tears. The room grew tense. Elaine placed a hand on my arm as if to soothe me. Luther, perhaps you misinterpreted something. We all get weary at times. Her kindness stung more than her doubt. It was pity disguised as comfort. From the corner, a relative whispered, just loud enough. Maybe he's slipping. Age does that. The words cut like a blade. Marla leaned against Damien's shoulder, looking fragile, and the image of it turned my son against me completely. His voice rose, sharp and furious. Enough! Dad, stop shaming my wife in front of everyone. If you care about this family at all, you'll let this go. The silence afterward was heavier than any argument. In that stillness, I slid my hand into my coat and felt the envelope Wallace had given me. Proof. Waiting. My heart pounded with the choice. Reveal it now and risk tearing the family apart, or hold it close until the right moment forced the truth into the light. I said nothing. The room blurred with judgmental eyes, but I stood tall, gripping the envelope like a lifeline. In that room, I stood accused not by strangers, but by my own blood, and the only proof of my truth lay folded in silence against my chest. The Sunday luncheon buzzed with the usual chatter of Charleston neighbors, but beneath the clink of silverware and the hum of polite conversation, whispers about me moved like smoke through the room. I felt them, sharp as pins against the back of my neck. Rumors of confusion, of senility, of a man too far gone to know truth from imagination. Marla sat at the center table, posture flawless, her dress in a shade of pale blue that caught the light just right. She looked the part of the wronged woman, fragile yet dignified, every gesture designed to remind the crowd of her supposed innocence. They wanted me old, confused, irrelevant, I thought, my hands tightening around the envelope hidden in my coat. But today, I would not sit quietly. The room smelled of roasted chicken and buttered rolls, the food untouched in front of me. My gaze swept over familiar faces, neighbors I'd known for decades, business acquaintances who once shook my hand with respect, and family members who now looked at me with pity. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against tile louder than I intended, and stood. A hush fell. Even the children seemed to pause mid-bite. I held the envelope steady, forcing my voice calm. I have something to share, I began. From the corner of my eye, I saw Damien stiffen, his jaw clenched, while Marla's eyes narrowed, the faintest twitch betraying her composure. I withdrew the crumpled foil packet Wallace had carefully sealed and placed it on the table for all to see. Gasps echoed. This, I said. I found in my own kitchen the night of the party, a packet that smelled of bitterness, discarded in my trash after Marla so graciously poured me a drink. Murmurs rippled. Marla pressed a hand to her chest, feigning outrage. "How dare you?" she said, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "This is madness." I steadied myself. "It is not madness. I watched her sprinkle powder into my wine glass, and when I lifted it for a toast, I switched it. She drank from it herself." The air grew heavy. Elaine Quinlan looked stricken, glancing at her daughter as if searching for a denial that would come too easily. Harold Quinlan's frown deepened into something darker. Damien's face flushed crimson. Before the silence could choke us all, Clara Boone rose from the back of the room, her hands trembling. "I heard her," Clara said softly, her voice shaking but clear enough for all to hear. "The night before the party. She was on the phone, talking about debts that had to be paid before Sunday. And she mentioned the powder." The room erupted. Gasps. Whispered accusations, head swiveling toward Marla. Ruth Calder, my neighbor of 30 years, nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on me with quiet sympathy. I felt something shift. For once, I wasn't the old man to be pitied, but the man speaking truth long buried. "Enough," Harold Quinlan barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. His gaze burned into Marla. "Tell me this isn't true." Elaine rushed to her daughter's side, murmuring soft words of protection, but cracks appeared in her tone. The carefully constructed image of unity faltered. Marla's mask cracked. Her lips curled into a snarl I had never seen in public. "He's lying. He's a senile old man, desperate for attention. Look at him, clinging to the last scraps of dignity, trying to drag us all down with him." Her words cut, but I saw how the crowd reacted. They no longer looked at me with pity. They looked at her with suspicion. The mask had slipped too far to be pulled back. Damien stood abruptly, his chair scraping hard against the floor. His chest rose and fell with fury. He glanced at me once, then at his wife, and without a word stormed out, the slam of the door echoing through the hall. The room split, some clinging to Marla's cries, others exchanging wary glances that betrayed doubt. I sat slowly, my hand brushing against the edge of Wallace's envelope still resting in my coat. My work was not finished, but in that moment, as Marla faced the crowd alone, I felt the tide shift. As my son's footsteps echoed out the door, I knew the tide had turned. Her fortress of lies was crumbling, and she was trapped inside it. The house had never felt so hollow. Walls that once held echoes of laughter now seemed to amplify silence, each creak of the floorboards reminding me that trust, once fractured, left nothing but shadows behind. I sat in my study, staring at the old clock on the mantel, its pendulum swinging like a quiet metronome, marking time in a life that had grown too still. Damien hadn't called since the luncheon. Every ring that didn't come cut deeper than any words could. By Sunday, I forced myself to church, a place where solace had always seemed near. But as I stepped inside, the sanctuary felt colder than the air outside. I felt their eyes on me, neighbors, old friends, people who once shook my hand with warmth. Now, whispers trailed in my wake like smoke. That old man, accusing his own daughter-in-law. Shame, isn't it? Families tearing themselves apart. Some looked at me with pity, their glances soft but heavy with doubt. Others looked away altogether, as if avoiding a man tainted by scandal. The sermon blurred in my ears. All I heard was the low hum of suspicion, buzzing like hornets, ready to sting. Afterward, I lingered at the back steps, watching families file out arm in arm. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing to me. The mother whispered something sharp and hurried her along. The isolation wrapped around my chest, tighter than the humid Charleston air. It wasn't long before Damien appeared. He didn't call ahead, didn't knock, just let himself in the following evening as if he still belonged in this house. But the way he stood in the doorway, arms folded, eyes cold, told me he didn't. "I need to make something clear," he said flatly. "Marla's my wife. Whatever you think you saw, whatever story you've spun, it ends here. I have to stand by her." I studied his face, searching for the boy I'd raised, the one who used to follow me to the docks, who begged for stories about his grandfather. Instead, I found a man with fear etched in the lines around his eyes, fear that loyalty to a woman might cost him truth. "You call it standing by her," I said quietly. "I call it turning away from me." His jaw clenched. "You've lost perspective, Dad. Everyone thinks so." You're making things up." The words cut, not because they doubted me, but because he believed them. He left without sitting, without looking back. And the slam of the door echoed through the house like a final verdict. The next day, I sought out Wallace. His office smelled of old books and faint cigar smoke, grounding me in the presence of a man who'd weathered storms before. I told him everything: Damien's rejection, the whispers at church, the tightening grip of Marla's lies. Wallace leaned back, fingers steepled. "She's cornered, Luther. When people like her feel walls closing in, they don't fold, they attack. I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to turn this legal." I frowned. "Legal? How?" "Harassment, defamation. She'll say you're imagining things, that you're targeting her, and in Charleston, appearances matter. We'll need Clara's testimony, the foil packet, every scrap of proof." His words settled like stone in my stomach. Proof. Evidence. I thought of the packet I'd hidden, Clara's whispered confession, pieces of truth, fragile as glass, against the weight of my son's disbelief. That night, alone again, I pulled out the box of old family photographs. Damien at 5, perched on my shoulders at the beach. Damien at 16, grinning next to his first car. Damien at his wedding, eyes full of hope as Marla held his arm, each picture stabbed with the reminder of what was slipping away. A knock broke the silence. The mail slid through the slot. I picked up the envelope, thick, official, bearing the seal of the court. My hands trembled, not with age, but with the cruel recognition of what it meant. A restraining order, filed by Marla. The paper blurred as I read the lines. Words heavy with accusation, that I posed a threat, that I was unstable, that she feared for her safety, and Damien, my own son, had signed his name in support. I sank into the chair, the weight of betrayal pressing harder than any burden I'd carried before. The envelope trembled in my hands, not from age, but from the cruel weight of knowing my own blood had let her strike first. The letter still sat on the table, its edges curling slightly in the damp Charleston air. Restraining order. I must have read the words a dozen times, yet they refused to soften. Each line painted me as unstable, dangerous even. But what pierced deepest wasn't Marla's venom, it was Damien's signature on the supporting affidavit. My son's name scrawled beneath a lie. It wasn't her handwriting alone on the paper, it was his silence, etched into every word, cutting deeper than any blade. Wallace Darden leaned back in his office chair, hands folded as if bracing me for a storm. "She's building a narrative, Luther," he said, voice calm but firm. "To the court, you're no longer just a father. You're an accused threat." The weight of it pressed on my chest like a millstone. He pushed a folder toward me, its spine thick with forms. "We'll file a counter. You've got evidence, bitte, and we'll use it. But understand, this won't be quick, and it won't be clean." The law books lining his shelves blurred for a moment. My mind drifted back to my wife, her steady hand guiding me through harder days than this. "Grief doesn't break you, Luther," she used to say. "It just teaches you where you bend." Now, I wasn't sure if I was bending or already breaking. By the time I left Wallace's office, the sun hung low over Charleston's rooftops. Back at home, I spotted it immediately. A black sedan idling across the street, its windows tinted, engine humming faintly, watching, always watching. I drew the curtains but couldn't shake the feeling of eyes pressed against the glass of my life. Clara Boone hovered in the kitchen, nervously drying the same dish twice. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Branson, I overheard her again. Marla. She said she'd find more proof. Something to bury you." Her hands trembled against the porcelain. Fear radiated off her, but her loyalty stood taller than her fear. I nodded slowly, trying to anchor her courage with my own. "Truth doesn't need staging, Clara. Lies do." That evening, Ruth Calder's knock broke the heavy silence. She stepped onto the porch, her posture braced against the twilight. "I've been quiet long enough," she said, eyes steady. "I saw her that night, by the drinks table. She slipped something in. Luther, I'd swear it under oath." Her words struck like a beam of light through storm clouds. For the first time in days, hope warmed the edges of my despair. We sat together as dusk turned the garden blue, the cicadas singing their endless hymn. Ruth placed her hand on mine, grounding me. "You're not alone in this fight," she whispered. That promise carried more weight than any court document Marla could muster, but by the next morning, the fight had escalated. Wallace filed the counter-motion, his voice sharp with conviction. Yet before the ink had dried, Marla was already feeding the press. Headlines bloomed like weeds. Local patriarch spirals, family files, order to protect daughter-in-law. My phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from neighbors, whispers turning into wildfire. When it finally rang again, I answered to Milton Graves's gravelly voice. "Luther, listen to me. They're not just coming for your freedom, they're coming for your estate." The phone shook in my hand as his words sank in. It wasn't just my dignity they wanted, it was everything I had left. The courthouse loomed ahead, its heavy oak doors rising like a reminder of every battle I had ever fought in life. My legs were slower now, 74 years worn into the bones, but they carried me through those doors with a weight I couldn't ignore. This time, it wasn't criminals or strangers on trial. It was my own dignity, my sanity, my truth. Inside, the courtroom buzzed in hushed tones, the way church pews do before the pastor speaks. Eyes slid toward me, some filled with pity, others curiosity, still others quiet judgment. Damien sat near the front, his arm wrapped protectively around Marla as if shielding her from me. The sight hollowed me out more than I'd expected. The judge called the session to order. Papers shuffled, voices lowered, and soon it was Marla's turn to speak. She walked to the stand with measured steps, her pale dress and carefully pinned hair making her look like a porcelain figure cracked just enough to invite sympathy. When she began, the tears came easily, rolling down her cheeks as though rehearsed. She spoke of humiliation, of the night at my party when I turned against her, when I called her a liar in front of family and friends. She painted me as paranoid, unstable, desperate to hold on to control after my retirement. "He sees shadows where there are none," she sobbed. Damien reached for her hand, his face tense, his eyes fixed on the floor rather than on me. Each word of hers was a blade, slicing away the man I had been in the community, a man who built, who sacrificed, who gave. Now, in the eyes of strangers, I was just an aging father consumed by suspicion, but Wallace Darden had prepared for this moment. He rose, his voice firm, deliberate, unyielding. "Your Honor, we have witnesses." First came Clara Boone, my housekeeper. She looked nervous as she stepped to the stand, her hands clutching the edge of the Bible a little too tightly, yet her voice, though quiet, was steady. She told the court what she had heard outside the kitchen door, that she overheard Marla whispering about debts, about needing to clear them before Sunday, and about the powder. Gasps rippled across the gallery. I saw faces turn, whispers spark like wildfire. Marla stiffened in her seat, her knuckles whitening as she gripped Damien's arm. The judge banged the gavel once for order, but the murmurs lingered. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight shift ever so slightly off my shoulders. Then Ruth Calder, my neighbor, walked to the stand. There was no tremor in her step, no quiver in her voice. She told the court what she had seen, the careful switch of glasses, the suspicious packet she noticed near Marla, and the hollow ring in Marla's laughter before her collapse. Her words rang with the resonance of a church bell on Sunday morning. Clear, undeniable, steady, truth given flesh. I watched Marla's composure falter. Her shoulders stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line, and the mask she had worn so easily for months began to crack. When Wallace finished, the silence in the room was heavier than any outburst, until Marla broke it herself. She snapped, her voice sharp, her words aimed like knives at Ruth. "You old busybody, you've always envied me." The gallery gasped again. Even Elaine Quinlan, her mother, looked away in shame. Damien buried his face in his hands. The judge slammed the gavel hard this time. "Order in the court." The sound echoed like thunder through the chamber. But the louder sound was Marla's own outburst, her mask tearing apart under the weight of truth. And in that moment, I knew. We were closer to the end than she realized. The final day in court arrived with a silence that pressed against the walls of the Charleston County Courthouse. The heavy air carried the smell of old wood and paper, reminding me of trials I had once watched as a younger man, back when justice felt simpler. Now, it was my own name on the line. My cane clicked against the floor as I entered, and every eye seemed to follow me. They wanted to see if the old man still had any strength left. Marla was already seated, her posture rigid, hands folded in her lap as if rehearsed. She looked every bit the victim she wanted the world to see. Pale, fragile, the corners of her eyes wet with carefully managed tears. Yet beneath the performance, I could see the cracks forming. When the judge called her to the stand, she took a breath too shallow, too shaky. Her words faltered as she tried once more to paint me as paranoid, confused, unfit to manage my own affairs. But her story no longer ran smooth. She contradicted herself, first saying she never touched the wine glass, then later insisting she poured it carefully with her own hands. Each slip drew murmurs from the crowd. I kept my gaze steady, not on her, but on Damien. My son sat beside her, jaw tight, hands clasped so hard his knuckles whitened. He wouldn't look at me, but he wasn't nodding along with her either. It was the first small crack in his wall of loyalty. Wallace stood, calm and deliberate, carrying a folder that seemed to weigh the room down. "Your Honor," he said, "we have submitted toxicology results conducted independently." He handed the papers forward. They confirmed traces of a poisonous compound on the wine glass Mr. Branson identified, the glass he did not drink from. The gallery stirred, a wave of whispers spreading like a breeze through dry leaves. Harold and Elaine Quinlan stiffened in their seats, horror carving lines deeper into their aging faces. Elaine covered her mouth. Harold simply stared at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Marla's mask began to crumble. She shifted in her seat, eyes darting, searching for some corner of the room that would rescue her. Her lips trembled when she spoke, but the words were barely audible. "That's not possible." The judge adjusted his glasses, voice stern. "The evidence is clear. The restraining order is dissolved. Further, this court refers the matter for criminal investigation regarding attempted poisoning." His gavel struck, sharp as thunder. Her ambition had finally devoured itself. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with reporters and family alike, their questions pressing in. Damien leaned against the wall, shoulders hunched as though he carried the weight of two lives, his wife's shame and his father's vindication. When our eyes met, he finally broke. Tears pooled in his eyes, his voice shaking. "Dad, I didn't know. I thought you were slipping. I thought—" He covered his face with both hands. The strong young man I had raised now reduced to a child once more. "Can you ever forgive me?" I placed a hand on his shoulder, heavy but steady. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can hand you, son. A man must live with the choices he's made, but you still have time to make better ones." That night, the house was quiet again, but not with the emptiness of defeat. I sat on the porch as the cicadas hummed, their chorus rising into the warm Carolina sky. The stars hung low, as if the heavens themselves leaned in to listen. Clara brought me a cup of tea, her kindness unspoken but deeply felt. Ruth stopped by too, her firm presence a reminder that not everyone had turned their back. We sat in silence for a while, watching the shadows of oak branches sway across the lawn. My heart carried scars now, deeper than any wound time had given me before. Yet there was also peace. I thought of all those who might hear my story, men and women growing old in a world that sometimes forgets them. To them, I would say this: betrayal often cuts from within the family, sharper than any blade. But silence does not mean weakness. Age does not mean surrender. Dignity and truth remain weapons for those who refuse to bow to lies. As the night settled over Charleston, I felt the lesson settle into my bones. Legacy is not measured only in wealth or property. It is measured in the courage to defend one's honor, even when abandoned, even when betrayed. And in that, I had not failed.